Hello, and welcome back. Today, we're talking about environment scanning. Before I begin, I would like to mention the works of Christoph Schindler and Nicholas Brunet. The level of detail in their environments has been a constant source of motivation for me, and I encourage you to check out more of their amazing work. Environment scanning is such a complex subject that I decided to break this up into two videos. This video will focus on natural environments, and the next video will focus on man-made environments. And that way we can focus on everything without having to sit through one giant 25-minute long video. And to be clear, I'm focusing on 3D scanning for visual effects. If you're scanning for 3D printing or surveying, a lot of the information here is still relevant, but you might do some things differently. And that being said, let's get started. When looking at the environment you want to scan, ask yourself two questions. Can this be scanned? And if so, how much of it do I want to scan? Now, technically, just about any place can be scanned, but we want clean scans. Getting a clean scan from a pile of rocks is going to be a lot easier than getting a clean scan of a dense forest or a snow-covered mountain. So decide if it's even worth your time first. As for how much of it you need to scan, that depends on what the camera sees. If it doesn't show up in your final image or film, it doesn't need to be scanned. The less area you have to scan, the smaller the details can be in your final model. All environments fall under one of two categories that I've made up: occluded and non-occluded. Occluded environments are places like forests, grassy plains, deserts with lots of cacti, places where you have all this stuff in the way of the terrain, usually plant life. The stuff that makes getting clean scans a lot harder. Non-occluded terrains, on the other hand, are relatively easy to scan. These are places like mountains, barren deserts, rocky beaches, places where you have a clean, unobstructed view from the camera to the terrain. And if you want clean scans, you have to take a different approach to shooting your images, depending on whether the environment is occluded or non-occluded. We'll focus on non-occluded environments first. And what better place to start than at the foothills of the great Florida mountains? Of course, Florida doesn't have any mountains, so we'll just go to the beach instead. With non-occluded environments, you can treat everything as one big object and scan it all together. The way I like to work is pretty simple. I shoot in manual so my exposures stay the same, and just gradually move around the subject. Shoot in passes so you get rows of images from multiple angles. If I'm shooting something big, I like to use my wide lens, which is a 10 to 20mm Sigma. If it's bright enough, I like to shoot at f8 to maximize image sharpness. Orient your camera to maximize the space the subject takes up in the frame. Sometimes you'll need to watch out for your shadow, and avoid adding footprints into your scanning area as you work. If the environment you're capturing is mostly horizontal surfaces, you'll want to shoot downward predominantly. If it's mostly vertical surfaces, you'll mostly shoot from the side. Again, this is to maximize the size of the environment's features in the frame. Alright, you just shot a wide pass of the environment. That might be all you need to shoot, depending on how detailed you want the mesh to be. Texture maps can also hide a lot of mistakes. In visual effects, all that matters is how good it looks, not how good it actually is. But if you do need more detail, shoot a second pass of photos, this time getting closer to the environment. The more time you put into shooting your source images, the better your results can be, as long as you don't shoot more images than your computer can actually handle. If that is a problem, one thing that can cut down on the number of photos you have to shoot is getting a sharper lens. The resolving power of your lens is more important than the megapixel resolution of your camera. Some of the best scans I've ever seen have come from a camera with just a 6 megapixel sensor. Jean-Marc Roulier captured these using a Konica Minolta Dynac 7D, and often shoots less than 100 images per scan. Now that's a tire scan you can take home to mom. A sharper lens will benefit every type of scan, but especially in environment scanning, where we're sometimes dealing with very large areas. A sharper lens is a huge help. Sharper glass means more detail captured in each image, which means fewer images needed overall. Now, if you're dealing with a really big area, it's easier to use a UAV to shoot your images, if you have access to one. I don't, but I do have a GoPro which John and Mary bought me for Christmas. If you are using a GoPro or a similar type of camera, you may need to correct for the barrel distortion of the lens. If you generate your scan from GoPro images straight out of the camera, you'll get distorted meshes. This trestle is straight in real life, but came out curved in PhotoScan. Undistorting images is simple. If you use Adobe software, this video will help you. There's also a program called PT Lens which can be used. Small cameras like these are also great if you're working in an area that is very difficult to navigate. Just stick the camera on a UAV and shoot from a distance. A GoPro is great for cheap, fun scanning, but the detail in the images is not great. It looks like somebody applied the watercolor filter in Photoshop. So if you desire high quality, you'll want to research better cameras for UAV scanning. Okay, so that's how I like to shoot non-occluded environments. But occluded environments require a different approach. Tell me what you see here. Trees, grass, bushes, vines. Basically, this is hell.
Occlusion hell.
In places like this, you can scan everything in one go if you just need raw spatial data, like if you're surveying. But if you want clean scans that don't look like blobs, you have to start breaking down the scene into individual components, deciding what can be scanned and what cannot. Big things like trees, rocks, and bare ground can give very good results. But things that are made up of lots of small structures like grass and bushes and shrubs will never come out clean unless you scan each piece individually. These things are better left to traditional modeling or using resources such as the Grass Essentials Kit by Andrew Price or the Blending Nature Assets from Derek Goff. If you're in a hurry, you can get decent results scanning a tree with a wide lens and a single row of pictures. If you want really good detail though, shoot at least 2 or 3 rows of images at different heights. You won't be able to get a clean scan of the leaves or the small branches of the upper canopy, but you can always extend your scan with traditional modeling using the captured data as reference. As you may have noticed, I generate most of my scans at medium quality. My Barbie PC simply isn't practical for generating at high quality from more than 30 or 40 images, but yours very well may be. If it is, you'll see a nice jump in quality from medium to high. For instance, here's a partial tree scan generated on high from just 22 images. If you do a lot of environment scanning, you'll quickly find it's not the most comfortable activity. Standing hunched over and looking through a viewfinder will quickly take its toll on your back. So here's some gear I recommend to make the task easier. First, get a monopod. It's cheap, simple, and will make your shots sharper. Next, get a cabled shutter release for your camera. This will also make your shots sharper, probably, and will allow you to hold a more comfortable posture when shooting low and high angles. It will also enable you to place the camera in positions you wouldn't normally be able to reach otherwise. My last basic suggestion is to add a head to the monopod. This way you'll be able to set the camera in either portrait or landscape orientation, depending on what suits the subject best. If you want to get the camera really high, higher than your monopod will allow, all you really need is a pole. PVC, wood, metal, any kind of pole will do. To attach the camera, I use something called a super clamp. Strong, simple, and it's a really versatile piece of kit. So I'm not spending money on something I can only use for one thing. Now, if you want to get your camera ridiculously high, look into collapsible poles, such as a painter's pole. Just be careful when putting a heavy DSLR on top of a tall pole, and use common sense when shooting outside. And lastly, here are some quick tips. The size of your domain or bounding box affects your processing time. The smaller the box, the less PhotoScan has to process, and the higher you can set the quality level when generating the dense point cloud. If you're using a super wide lens, check for a vignette in your images. It's an easy thing to fix in Adobe Camera Raw. Depth filtering. This could have a section all its own, but basically, if I'm shooting in a non-occluded environment, I usually set it to low or moderate. If I'm shooting in an occluded environment, it's usually moderate or high. Basically, the better your source images are, the lower you can set it without getting nasty results. You can make small things look big. Need a CG mountain but don't live near a mountain? Look for some big rocks to scan. Need a big funky looking tree but can't find one? Scan a bonsai. Small rocks can look like boulders. You can always tweak the materials of a scan later on to fit your vision. Remember, PhotoScan is just a tool. It's a means to an end. It's not the end itself. Learn to use the software in new and weird ways. Find a box, scan it, and then think outside it. So there you have it, my tips for environment scanning, part 1. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll answer them personally. And stay tuned for part 2 of environment scanning, which is coming soon. And as always, thanks for watching. If you're interested in game development, check out the behind the scenes for the Unreal Kite demo, especially starting at the 14-minute mark. They have some pretty cool PhotoScan stuff in there.